I believe that smart community is actually one that is able to satisfy the needs of the community through what they're able to provide. And often we need to look at how technology is part of that. But also with that sustainability in mind is how do we do that to provide for the needs now, and how do we do that in a way that doesn't impact on people being able to provide for their needs in the future. And so I think a smart community is one that's got it all together, that's able to know what those things are and is working towards doing it. Certainly being in local government, I know not everything happens as quick as what sometimes people want it to, but it's about are we moving towards those things and are we doing that in a way that provides for our community, not just economically, but also for the social values that our community needs.
Hi, Smart Community friends. In this episode of the Smart Community Podcast, I have a delightful chat with Fiona Barden. Fiona works with Coffs Harbour City Council, leading the Industry and Destination Development section, which looks after the economic development of the region and fosters tourism attraction and visitation. In this episode, Fiona begins by telling us about her interesting and varied background, her passion for business, and in particular looking at economic viability for regions, and discusses some of Coffs Harbour's current top sectors and industries. Fiona then tells us what a smart community means to her, a few of the changes she's seen in the recent years in her local community, and then discusses some of the projects she's been working on with the council. Fiona then talks about the council's approach to the COVID-19 pandemic and how this approach helped the community, as well as the council's economic development strategy and their approach to digital economy. We finish our chat discussing several emerging trends, including long-term recovery and resilience after natural disaster events, meaningful sustainable development, and lastly, how data is used and how it is useful for people in communities. As always, we hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
Welcome to the smart community, smart regions, smart towns, and smart cities. It's where we live, work, and play. With smart communities, the future starts today. Big data, smart mobility, emerging trends galore. The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.
Hello, Fiona. How are you today?
I'm well, thanks, Zoe.
That's so good to hear. And I'm so excited to have this conversation. It's been a long time coming, and I was just thinking about the last time we saw each other in person, which would have been
a few years ago now, I think. So
2019, maybe.
Yep, I think so.
Yep, at the Ignite.
That's right. Yep.
Yes, that was a fantastic conference. And yeah, I got to come to Coffs Harbour. That's right.
It's the most beautiful part of Australia.
Beautiful. It really was. Okay, enough about me though. Let's talk about you. Can you tell us your background and what you're passionate about?
Sure. So I have a very interesting background. So I grew up in regional New South Wales when my family moved to Sydney when I was in my last year of high school. And then I did a short stint of being a dental nurse, actually, which is quite an interesting place to start. And then had a family. Then my husband and myself moved to Coffs Harbour and took over the running of a tourist attraction, so a butterfly house. So two very interesting portals into my background. And from there, we grew a business. We started to understand what businesses were about, what regional businesses were, and particularly businesses in visitor economy and how different things impact business. So through that process of running a business for 12 years, I did a fair bit of study and started to really learn, I guess, about some of the, insecurities that lots of business owners have, and realised that I probably had good potential to work with business owners to try and work through some of those issues so that they could create success for themselves. So when we sold our business, I went into full-time work doing a state government role, assisting small businesses as they started up or as they grew. And that was funded by the state government at the time. And then from there, got poached over to council to run business development. So looking, not just working one-on-one with businesses, but actually looking at like more general industry kind of relationships and how things needed to work together as a whole. And since then, I've stepped into a leadership role. So my passion is business and I guess essentially looking at economic viability for regions in particular. I did a little stint last year over in a community planning role just for a stint and realised that business is really my passion. So while I am very sympathetic to lots of community needs, business is where I sit. So, and probably more lately through some further study that I've done is just understanding around innovation and sustainability. So how we can do business in a way that's great for people now, great for the whole community, and then how we can provide so that people in the future can still do what they need to do for themselves as well. So that's probably having much more of a focus on my attention lately.
Yeah, and the reason that I wanted you to come onto the podcast is because this, like, business is, you know, they're part of the communities, right? Particularly small business and particularly, well, all businesses, but in regional areas, as we know, they're the lifeblood of a lot of communities, right?
Mm-hmm. So we have about 87 or so percent, maybe even up to 90% of our businesses are small businesses, and then around 80% of those are just sole business owners working by themselves. So they are, it's quite interesting now that we're doing some, I guess, review of our community strategic plan, as with most other local government areas in New South Wales at the moment. And, we kind of went, we'll go out to business and we'll go out to the community. And we went, they're actually the same people. So it's a sector of the community. So
yeah. What in Coffs Harbour in particular, what are some of the, I guess, what are the biggest businesses, or not the biggest businesses necessarily, but what are the sectors? The industries.
So construction is our largest industry, and health, so healthcare and social assistance. And it really then depends on whether you look at, their value add, their business numbers or employees. So basically construction and health are always the top two. And then we have variant depending on what one of those you look at, but retail, tourism, education, agriculture, and also one other, professional services, so like financial and real estate and things like that. So often hit up the top in there as well.
Yeah, no, interesting. I always find it interesting and fascinating, the different regional areas and those top sectors that they have, because they're all so different, even though people might think that it's all the same.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to talk about some of the projects and things you've been working on, because that was one of the other reasons, because it crosses over. So, it's part of the smart community approach, and particularly your focus on innovation and doing things a bit differently. Yep. But let's talk about smart communities first. And what is a smart community to you?
So I guess, I was having a think about this, and it brought me back to something that you actually first said to me the first time I met you, so not the last time. We had actually started investigating some things around smart cities in our council area. And I remember that you said to me, it's not about finding a technology solution. It's actually about finding what the problem is for the community, and then how do we solve that potentially through tech. I believe that smart community is actually one that is able to satisfy the needs of the community through what they're able to provide. And often, I guess, we need to look at how technology is part of that. But also, I guess, with that sustainability in mind, is how do we do that to provide for the needs now, and how do we do that in a way that doesn't impact on people being able to provide for their needs in the future. So I think a smart community is one that's got it all together, that's able to know what those things are and is working towards doing it. Certainly being in local government, I know not everything happens as quick as what sometimes people want it to, but it's about, are we moving towards those things, and are we doing that in a way that provides for our community, not just economically, but also for the social values that our community needs.
Yeah, and no, I like that. And you touched on that it's not that kind of end destination, it's the journey. So, thinking about, particularly when we're thinking about local government, that we're aware and we're continuing to identify those issues and pain points as they come up, or as we know that they're there, and then looking at what solutions or what things can really support or impact those, the people in our community. I'm not saying solutions necessarily, because sometimes it's not, you might do one thing one day and that solves that problem, but actually you might create another thing that
something
needs
else.
to be solved.
That's right.
So it's the system of systems, and particularly in local government, we know that's how it operates.
Yep.
Yeah.
thinking, and I say particularly local government, particularly in communities, right? But
yes,
local government at the coalface with the communities is hyper aware of these things that maybe in other industries or even other levels of government don't have to focus on at a day-to-day level. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
Now, last time we were chatting face-to-face was 2019. Obviously, lots of stuff has happened since then. In your, I guess, community, what are some of the big things that you have seen change, other than, obviously people working from home and that type of thing? But is there anything that's kind of surprised you, as a result of all these changes, particularly in business, I suppose, that you've seen in your community?
Yes, I guess a couple of things on that regard is, firstly, the desire for our local community to look after each other. So we've had a really upswing in people buying local and in, I guess, supporting that local opportunity for each other. And the other thing is actually a really positive outlook, which is quite interesting through 2 and a bit years that people have been through recently. So we started with quite severe fires, obviously, in 2019, the end of 2019. Just coming into recovery of that, and COVID. We've had 2 lots of flooding and new things. So it's quite interesting that the community itself is still quite positive about our local area and our local community. So business is really trying to work out how they can make things work better so that they can continue to provide for the community. There's a lot of that, I guess, individual support from each business through to different layers of the community as well. I kind of feel a bit like I'm looking through rose-coloured glasses sometimes, but that's what we hear from the community, that it's a relatively, certainly from the business community, that there's a relatively positive outlook for things. So we've got a few major projects that are occurring at the moment that are state government funded and some that are federally funded. So that obviously brings a bit of impetus into the community, but certainly there is quite a rosy outlook of what life is like here and the potential to continue to grow on that. So that's actually been something that I've noticed that I wasn't expecting to notice. I thought it's a fair bit of doom and gloom over the last couple of years, so you wouldn't think that would be such a positive outlook for people.
Are you seeing growth in population outside normal kind of figures?
So certainly
regional?
Yeah, certainly our housing market would suggest that. So we don't have, I guess, official figures as yet. We know that there's certainly been a movement of people and probably less of a movement of people out of the area. So that migration it's occurred one way rather than both ways. So last stats that we looked at, there probably wasn't as many, there was as many people moved into the area, or maybe a little bit more, but because we haven't had particularly like uni students and things like that moving out to go to uni, they're studying online, the population has obviously grown. So, but, our housing market, like most other places around Australia, is quite tight, and availability of housing, I think we got down to a rental vacancy percentage of 0.4%. It's gone up. It's 0.8, I think, at the moment. So it's still like that kind of shows then that there's a large population who's here and certainly has been growing. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's been kind of talk both ways that, particularly there was like this flea change, which we talked about early on in the pandemic. And I guess the other, more the pandemic, but noting that there were a whole bunch of other things that were happening too, like you were talking about the bushfires and floods and that type of thing, which may have swung things the other way, but the pandemic kind of pushing people to regional. But actually looking at what the figures are now, and I guess we'll get those over time. But it's interesting, I hadn't really thought about people not leaving as well, because that's one of the biggest things, right? Finish school and students finish school and go off to uni and go to Sydney, Melbourne, wherever. So yeah, it would be definitely a different experience. Like my experience studying online, but it's a master's, so it was fine. I wasn't looking for a uni experience, but that will be very different. And it will be interesting to see whether it swings back to people wanting to go back to go into the city again and do that thing. But time will tell.
We'll wait and see.
We'll wait and see. Okay, well, tell us about some of the other projects and things that you've been working on or that your team have been working on.
Sure. So we've got, a couple of key focus industries that we consider as we develop the economic strategies for our community. So one of the projects that we've been involved with is a cooperative research centre around food, so the Future Food Systems, CRC. We're one of 6 locations around Australia that are involved in that. We've just recently completed our first research project, which has had a look at what the ecosystem of the agri-food economy is in our region and what potential there is there. And so we've been presented with a few recommendations around looking at how we develop both skill in the food industry and also value add production, because we produce a lot of produce here, particularly blueberries, and all bar about 8% of our product goes out of here whole. So we don't do a lot of value add production here, which the potential to then grow employment and grow lessen waste is a good thing to be looking at how we do that. So that's one of the recommendations that's come out of this report. And the third one is around how we harness the freight and logistics opportunity. We have a really quite good regional airport here. It's one of the biggest regional airports that exists, and we're kind of in the centre for road. So you can come across the mountain, so from Armidale, Tamworth, and you can come up and down, and we've got train and things as well. So just looking at how we make the most of those. So that's a really exciting, project to be part of. So we're just starting our second research report now, which will kind of look at the feasibility and viability of creating a regional food hub here. So how it will be used, how it will be managed, and what benefits will come from that. We also look at tourism as one of our key industries. Coffs is a highly visited destination. So, and over the last 2 years, we've gone through the process of being the first New South Wales destination to be eco-accredited. So really building on our nature-based tourism strategy to look at that delivery of nature-based experiences in a sustainable manner. And that visitors, both national and international, now that they've started coming again, really value that care for the environment that they're in as part of that experience. So we've also processed along with us 10 other businesses in our region to come through that accreditation as well. So not only is the destination accredited, I think by the end of the year, we've got about 6 businesses that are accredited now. By the end of the year, we'll have 13 of them. So it really shines a light then on what we have here. Both our locals, like our green natural area and our blue natural area as well, our ocean, is a really important thing to both locals and visitors. So it's kind of a building community pride, as well as giving an opportunity for visitors to be pleasantly surprised by what they find here. The third industry that we kind of do a fair bit of project and program work in is the digital economy, even though we're now realising that more and more that's just part of every industry and every economy. So we run a program here called 6 Degrees, which we look at how we, make the most of the opportunity that Coffs was the first destination to receive NBN. So we've built on that over a period of 8 or 9 years of how we actually support businesses that want to run through a digital program and digital industry to make sure that things are right for them. So one of the things that we've worked with a company that have bought through a data centre is being built here, so leading edge data centre. So that just adds to that, opportunity for digital businesses. Also have a private investment, but looking around a film studio being built here, which then builds on both our digital capability, but also our creative industries capability as well. So we're working with the people that are putting that together to see how we can build some skill opportunities for young people in our region. So good reason to stay, to skill up in a potentially environment that could bring, movies being built here and filmed here. So, I guess there's a lot going on when you kind of sit back and think. So our 6 Degrees program, which up until probably I'll say till 2020 was very much about how we provide opportunity for innovative digital businesses, has certainly, like everyone else, adapted and pivoted through the COVID lockdowns. And so what we have done a lot with that program is actually support existing businesses so that they have been given information, been given support, and been given a real opportunity to change the way that they deliver their business if that was what was needed. So we've provided the support around that. So we've kind of turned our focus a little bit because of the need in the community in that regard. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. I was going to ask, whether that's shifted, because I know you've been on that train for a long time, and how that's kind of adapted over time as well. So it's really interesting. And I guess thinking about what businesses actually needed during that time then, and then being able to shift and pivot kind of shows the agility of the program itself, which is, so I guess the point of digital, right?
Yeah, as an example, so we obviously, our tourism industry was heavily impacted, as was every other industry during lockdowns. And so one of the programs that we instigated was when we were looking to reopen the first time, so around June long weekend, I think it was, in 2020. So that was when regional travel in New South Wales was again allowed. And we realised that our community was quite anxious about people coming into our region, but our tourism operators really wanted people to come into our region. So it's kind of balancing that. How does that work? Because we need, the needs of business was to have visitors, but the needs of the community were a little bit more cautious. So what we did was we worked a program called Coffs Coast Businesses Care, and we developed a way of going around to businesses, mainly tourism, but any businesses, making sure, working with them on their COVID safety plan, making sure that they had all different things in place that were needed, and then used this symbol, Coffs Coast Business Care. So before state government started using COVID Safe, we were using that so that both our locals knew that the businesses were doing the right thing. So if they had visitors, they were attracting visitors, they were doing the right thing by that. But also visitors who came to the region knew that those businesses were doing things in a way that they were meant to. So it just provided that kind of opportunity around listening to both community and business and trying to work through that in a manner that worked in that regard. So so that's the kind of thing we've pivoted to. It wasn't a digital campaign at all. It literally, I think I've got 7 people in my team, and each of us did a different industry training package around what was needed for COVID, so that everyone was a different specialist. So if a certain industry asked questions, that they'd be able to answer them, and they'd know what was meant to be in the COVID safety plan and things like that. So it was a very practical way to provide support for business.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's what was needed at the time, right?
That's right.
That was 100% what was required. And I think that's really important too, that it's not just about the new flashy digital stuff or whatever. It's being able to adapt and change. And I think, and like it with the smart community approach, as you were talking about earlier, we do talk about technology, we talk about data, but we also talk about new ways of thinking and new ways of doing things. And I think that's sometimes that's, again, just really practical stuff, but being able to shift and change without having to, we know that you couldn't actually spell out absolutely everything because things were changing. So you need to be able to change and adapt. And that's where I think relationships, and like you talking about your team, that's where those things are really important, because you have to be able to trust each other. And I think that trust within the team, but then the trust within the council to the community and the council to the business, knowing that you're listening and that you're actually balancing, and they know that you're balancing those things as well.
Yes. So like I could talk forever about some of the stuff we did around COVID, but we put out surveys to our business community, and the first one we put out had something like 160 responses, which doesn't sound like heaps when we have 6,500 businesses in the area, but that's quite a large number of responses for a survey that council sends out. And we were able to either answer the things that came through a newsletter, or if we couldn't, we answered those individually. So it was that responsiveness and relationship building. And then what we found, so we normally send out an email or e-newsletter probably once every 3 weeks. We sent out 27 of them in a 9-week period, because there was constant change, but it was about putting things into bite-sized chunks. So we would dissipate our database into certain sectors and just send information that was relevant to certain people. And our business community appreciated that, and were very thankful that there was a myriad of information, but they knew that they were getting the parts that were important to them. So, that very much does. It builds trust with our business community, but it also allows, I guess, us to kind of understand what businesses were going through in that period of time, and how we could somewhat support what they were doing. We couldn't change things. We couldn't change what was going on in a worldwide pandemic, as my manager at the time said to me. It's a worldwide pandemic, Fiona, you can't solve it. But very much we were able to show them that we were on their side, I guess, and through that. We didn't, certainly through that first year of COVID, there wasn't, I think there was about 4 or 5 businesses only that closed down in Coffs. So, and some of them were probably were ready in the next year or two, would have been ready to sell on their business or retire. So it just made that a little bit quicker, that's all. So
accelerated the, yeah. And I think what you're talking about there, you might think that that's a small thing that you sent different industries, different information and bite-sized chunks or whatever, but it's actually about speaking in the language that was required, right? And that's so important because we know that we can have the best solution, but if we can't actually talk the language of the people that we're trying to serve, then we can't actually, it doesn't work. Like it's talking a different language, it's lost in translation. So I think that's really important. And I know, I mean, as a community member, we're all community members as well. Searching for information and was something that, I did on a daily basis during our first year or whatever. And so being able to being fed that information and obviously, as we know, and as you managed to say as well, we can't solve the worldwide pandemic, but we can try and use the tools that we have at our fingertips to make it easier for the people that we're serving. So,
for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, we didn't intend to talk about COVID necessarily on this podcast, but obviously it's been a big thing in the last few years. Yes. So projects and things. I'm just thinking, is there any other ones that you wanted to share that you've got planned coming up, or that you're have been doing in the last couple of years?
Yeah. So apart from those, I guess at the moment we're just in the process of renewing our economic development strategy. So it really is, I guess, a bit of a time where we've gone back out to community and said, hey, does this match what we're doing? Does this match with the needs that we have both now, short term, medium term and longer term? So while we have some projects and processes in place, so as I said about the food project and the tourism project, we are now, I guess, in a bit of a holding pattern just to kind of make sure that what we have understood in the past to be important is still where the direction is that our city wants to move. We're also, as I mentioned before, Council is doing the community strategic plan. So that's a plan that the community has for their future vision. Then Council is one of the proponents that acts on that. So that's being done as well. So that will give us a bit clearer picture of where our community wants to be. And then our economic development strategy looks a little bit more around where do we want to be in an economic future as well. So we're probably not starting any more new projects at the moment, just waiting for that feedback to come through. Certainly the feedback that we've received so far, kind of the things that we're doing seem to hit the mark, but there are some other ideas coming through as well, which we will then explore as to whether there's something that we can influence or deliver as council, or whether it's us advocating for someone else to take that on and do it. So,
Yeah, cool. And you said something interesting before around, you talking about your digital economy and that it's actually just a, thread that weaves throughout, the whole council, the whole community. Have you seen a different approach? You've been kind of in this space and, obviously focus on business, but, I know that like the innovation space and smart community space. Have you seen a different approach emerge since, this kind of acknowledgement? And I think it's an acknowledgement of the industry as well, is that we're weaving digital throughout. Have you seen a different approach within council because of that kind of realisation?
Yeah, I presume. So I guess probably where we think along that is that things are becoming more digitally spaced. So you used to have to come in and bring in a paper DA form. Now that's all online. So they're quite basic digital integrations. But then we've just implemented in the last 6 months a proper customer relationship database tool, so that we can actually, rather than me having a conversation and then someone else in my team having a conversation, we're actually having intelligent conversations with our consumers because we've got all the background data and things like that. So that's a weaving through of a more digital platform than what we had in the past. Certainly what we tend to find, though, I guess, is that our community is made up of many, many different people, and there is and different needs of people. And there's a large portion of our community who's elderly and who don't necessarily flavour the whole digital experience as part of what they do. And we also have some disadvantaged components of our community as well, which again don't have accessibility to some of the more digital opportunities that exist. So what we need to do is weave how we actually create opportunity for people who want to move forward, so that future skilling, but also still be able to provide for members of our community who may not be as able to do that. One of the things I guess that we can have the most influence on is how we work with some of our education providers to look at how do we continue to upskill people in these movements. So a really, I guess, basic kind of example is we deliver visitor services to our visiting public, and we do that in a way that's a more digital component but is a dispersed model. So rather than having a visitor information centre in one spot that everyone has to come to, we have a quite highly defined digital program that helps people understand, what activities and what opportunities there are here. We're in the process of putting together trails and itineraries based on augmented reality so that people can understand what's going on. And then we have 6 small visitor hubs that people can still go to and pick up paper maps and talk to a local about what experiences are there, but they're based throughout our whole LGA, so you don't have to go to one stop. And then the last thing that we do is we actually educate all of our tourism operators on what's happening. So it doesn't matter where you go and ask someone, you're getting that same standard information. And we remind them of those things through e-newsletters and the like. So it's a digital component to a previously quite, manual process of delivering information. So now we're not the only people in the world that do that. Everywhere has a website and things like that, but the dispersal of actual hard or printed information is something that we do a little bit differently. And for us, it's a much more satisfactory way to meet the needs of visitors. But for some of our visitors, they're expecting a centre that they go to and that's where everything is. So we need to manage how that's done. Ultimately, we would love it all to be digital, but understanding the different needs of our visitors and things means that we have to work out how we do that in a way that satisfies many.
Yeah, I really like that because, again, it's going back to the channels and the languages that people want to consume that information in.
That's right.
And you're understanding the community and understanding your visitors, then you can provide that in the way that they need it. And again, like you said, it's shifts and change, and you continue to build and work on it, and continue to listen to community and the feedback and everything. But you found a model that works based on the experiences that you've had. So no, it's really interesting. And like you said, other places do it, but you're doing it in the context of Coffs. And I think that's a really key component of that. And that's what creates smart communities. It's not just necessarily advanced digital, whatever widgets. It's thinking about those needs and meeting those. So that's great. Sure. It's a great example.
Yeah.
Well, let's zoom to the future now. And what are the emerging trends that people aren't talking about enough?
So I was thinking about this question because it's quite interesting talking from a local government perspective, because sometimes we need to just relate to what it is. So I would suggest that recovery is probably something, while it's there, we probably talk more about response than what we do about long-term recovery and what that looks like. And some of that comes about because there's been, I guess, event on top of event on top of event. But so that recovery and resilience, I think we bandy the word resilience around, but I don't know that we actually deliver well on what that means. And so based on that, I guess the cause and the impacts of ongoing events are probably something that is not being talked about as much. And again, because we're responding continuously, but that's probably something that it's keeping on happening. And so we need to try and work out how we look after that and look for that. And then I guess the last thing is just sustainable development, like in a way that means something to people. So in my recent study, I was introduced to a topic around donor economics and looking at how we kind of understand how to create a thriving economy that provides for our community, but within the means that we have. And, I kind of say economic development or economics is about the use of scarce resources. So how do we do that? then economic development is those programs, activities and policies that create quality of life for people within a community. So sustainable development is about how we do that now for our community now, but without impacting that future community to do that for themselves. So if you're kind of looking at, it's not an issue for people to make money. So creating a environment where someone is able to make a business that is hugely successful is not an issue at all, providing that it's giving something so that the community are able to. So we might charge them taxes so that they can pay for a service to be delivered. We might provide, encourage them to create jobs for local people rather than shelling them out around the country and things like that. So it's that kind of opportunity. The thriving economy is the thing that provides prosperity for the whole community rather than just for a select few. So then looking at what are the needs of the community, how do we do that? So I think when I studied my master's, I did a unit on economics and then I did a unit on sustainability 4 units later, and I went, why did we not learn about this when we learned about economics? Because so I think that connection through about how do we actually provide for our community through economic futures is probably something that I don't think is talked about enough, and we need to do it, and it's becoming more and more relevant to what we do. So that's
I love that. And I think as you were talking there, it's like linking these things together that, like you said, you studied a master's, you did this one first, then you did this one. Like, why aren't these linked? I often have the same thoughts around data and that type of thing as well. And I think we'll see more of those things merging because we realise, and we talked about it earlier, the systems of systems in our communities. And if we want things to shift and change, it's not necessarily that we need to come up with something brand new, but it's actually bringing these other things together and getting those people, the economists, to talk to the sustainable development, consultants, whatever, the people that are thinking about these things. So I think they're great trends to continue to talk about. And I think recovery is also one, like you said, we talk about it, but then something else is happening on top of that. And so we're responding. So moving into that recovery mode. And then what that looks like too. We don't want to necessarily just recover and survive. We want to thrive and learn from things that have happened as well, and what the data is telling us. And also what data is missing, like what are things that we go, oh, I wish I knew that before and after effect, and those type of things as well.
That's right. I guess some of the things, and I don't know, might be a future question, but just looking at some of those resources and certainly, some of that data that we can access, how do we use it and what's it for? Because I think some people are quite scared that, you're finding out all this information about me, but how do we use that to actually provide? So, some of the insights and, spend insights and things like that actually provide really good data for then services to be provided in the right way. We have done some recovery around bushfire impacts in our region, and we have access to a heat map data. Now we can see what people visited that region before we started doing the promotion. That's part of their recovery, and we can see what it is now. And it's significantly changed visitation to that area, which is an important thing for them in their recovery because they want to stand up. They want to be able to provide for their local community and things. So just that data, which is just mobile phone data about where people are. We can't identify the individual people, but we know there's more people travelling the routes that we're suggesting to them to do. So it then means, okay, that's a good thing to keep doing, rather than if we looked at it and it had no cause or impact, then we go, okay, we need to change this. What do we need to do instead? And I think people get scared by the use of data, but it's actually to inform so that better decisions can be made. So that's probably a trend that we need to talk about as well, is what the data is used for and how it's useful for people within our community to do that.
Yeah, I think, and that's a brilliant example as well, because we're not identifying the individual person. So we don't know that Fiona is going from A to B, but we know that there's a group of people. So, and like you said, it's actually looking at, well, we did this intervention. We know what it was before, and now we know after. So we'll continue to do that. Whereas, you learn other things and go, oh, well, what if we tried this? Then we could shift and change that. And I think you're right. That's important. But, and talking about going back to what we were talking about earlier, it's about trust. It's a trust thing, and which means that we need to then, and again, talk about the language thing as well. It keeps coming up in this convo, but it's like we need to be able to then explain to the community why we're doing this, and then show them that it is making a really, big impact on how things are shifting and changing, and that recovery aspect of it too. And I think once we do that, once we have that, it's like, that focus and awareness, then we can start to build that trust and that data literacy component as well with our community, but also within government, within business, within it's not just the community that we need to lift. It's all kind of sectors.
And certainly some of the feedback we're hearing as we're doing like sessions around gathering information for our new economic development strategy, that communication and trust building is a really, really important feature that people are looking for. They're trying to understand what we do as local government, what other levels of government do, and people are interested to understand what that is. But we often communicate things in a way, so local government does, in a way to satisfy state government, because that's often who requests that, but we don't necessarily do it in a way that our community understands, or they have to read a 30-page document to find something. So that's a really vital thing. And I had a little giggle when you said it's coming up a lot in this conversation, because it's actually coming up a lot in everything we're doing at the moment, is that real importance use of both language and communication tools that meet the needs of our community.
Yeah, and that's such an important point you make there as well, is the audience for a lot of this information is, maybe state government, and for businesses it may be the auditors, or it may be the whatever, but actually, and you said the community are actually quite interested in this if we can give it to them in the chunks that they find interesting, right? And I think it's funny, sometimes when you do talk to just your friends or whoever, understanding what the council does, there's still a lot of growth in that space as well, and it continues to shift and change too, right? Like as technology evolves, as we get more and more involved, and we can make better decisions and that type of thing. So
for sure.
Well, Fiona, it's been so great to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing. Like, honestly, our audience loves hearing from local government, so I can never thank local government enough for coming on to the pod, because I think we don't hear from local government enough. So big thank you for coming onto the podcast. Now, last question, how can people connect with you?
Yeah, so my email is my name, so fiona.barden@chcc.nsw.gov.au. You can just get in touch with Coffs Council and ask them if you can't remember that email address. Just put through to me, or on LinkedIn. I'm there as well. I love LinkedIn, so I'm on it all the time, just viewing things. So easily a message through there is fine. I'm happy to be contacted and certainly can answer any more specific questions. I often say, as I said right at the beginning, I used to run a business and now I sit in local government, and I consistently say to my team, if we just sit in our office here and try and make decisions, we can't make wise decisions. We need to connect with our community. And likewise, it's not just our local community, but we need to learn and hear from people outside our community as well. So I'm really happy to have a conversation. I literally can be communicated with any time. I don't mind. My husband thinks I have nothing else to do. So both my children are old and left home. So literally, I don't respond in the middle of the night because I do sleep well. So, but certainly, I'm happy to be connected with. So,
Thanks so much, Fiona. We'll put all the links in the show notes. So open invitation, connect with Fiona, find out some more info about what's happening in Coffs and any other brilliant advice that Fiona can offer, being on lots of different sides of the table at different points in her life. So thank you again, Fiona. Really, really have enjoyed this conversation, and I look forward to seeing you in 3D sometime soon. Hopefully we can arrange that.
Yes.
Beautiful visit to Coffs, and I have been to that airport as well. It works perfectly fine. Smaller planes, but that's fine,
We now have direct flights from Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne, so 2 carriers from each, so there shouldn't be a hassle getting here at all. So
Excellent. There you go. Open invitation again. Let's all go to Coffs once it's safe. I think it's safe to do so these days.
It is. Yep. No problem. Perfect. So no. Thanks so much, Zoe. I really appreciated the opportunity.
We'll talk soon, Fiona. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Smart Community podcast is brought to you by My Smart Community. If you're trying to deal with disruption, not sure what technologies to buy, need to facilitate genuine collaboration, then we can help. Email hello@mysmart.community or head to www.mysmart.community/consulting.
Thanks so much for listening to the Smart Community Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes are available on our website, mysmart.community/podcast. If you have any questions for us or any of our guests, you can email hello@mysmart.community. You can also find us on the socials. We are on LinkedIn and Twitter @SmartComHQ. That's com with 2 M's. If you are enjoying the podcast, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we would love for you to leave us a rating and review at wherever you listen. This really helps us reach more ears and eyes, so thank you for your support. As always, we hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.